How many days had passed since leaving home? Young Princess Lenora had no idea. All she knew was pain, cold, and fear. Days, potentially weeks, had passed since her pursuers first took chase and forced her from her home. She was hiding among thorny thickets in a forest far from the last settlement she'd stayed in, wherever it was. Her legs were scarred and bleeding. She had to tear the bottom of her white skirt off and wrap them around her wounds. Softly, she sobbed in the silence of nature around her as she watched her pursuers pass by. There had to be hundreds of them, she thought. Her vision was blurred with tears. Pain clouded her mind. Sitting in the thicket was the first respite she'd had in a long time. Her heart was pounding faster and faster as she watched her pursuers. None of their faces were familiar. Were these even the pursuers she encountered back home? Lenora didn't remember anymore. At that moment, all she wished for was the peace and quiet of sleep, for her pain to be gone, to not be alone anymore. It was broad daylight by the time she found her way in the forest, and the sun was already nearing the horizon again. Lenora's heart skipped a beat. Soon it would be nighttime again. Another sleepless night running from an unknown enemy. Pulling another twig from her thick black hair, she looked back out from her hiding spot. The band of pursuers seemed to have passed her hiding spot for the time being. Holding her breath and stopping her tears, Lenora slowly stepped back out of the thicket. She could hear her own heartbeat in the silence of the fast-approaching evening. It grew faster as her feet touched down upon the grass beyond the thicket. The sky seemed to grow darker with every passing second. Lenora found herself unable to control her breath. She let it out in a sharp gasp and immediately regretted it. A single straggler further to the east heard the sound, his head turning faster than any humans ever could. Lenora gasped again, breathlessly this time, as she saw his piercingly yellow eyes. The man's lips curled into an inhumanly wide grin, revealing razor-sharp teeth as he spoke in a low growl, his voice seeming to echo against the wind and the rustling of leaves around them. Lenora felt her heart stop at the man's words. "Found you." The air in the forest had grown thick with fog. As the evening gave way to night, light was dispelled by the darkness. Goosebumps covered Princess Lenora's numb skin. Trying to catch her breath was becoming a taxing ordeal as she ran. But still, she ran. She ran as quickly as she could, regardless of the blood dripping from her body, regardless of the aching in her muscles, the constant spasms in her legs that sent immeasurable pain throughout her body with every step she took. Lenora didn't bother to turn back. Wind whistled in her ears. She could no longer hear the footsteps of her pursuers. Even so, she did not want to risk turning around. Taking as deep a breath as she could muster in the thick fog, she pushed on. Her legs moving on their own, she followed the trees of the forest. Something pushed her in the southern direction. Was it instinct? A god's interference? Necessity? Lenora no longer knew. Lenora no longer cared. Based on the persistence of her pursuers, it was life or death, and that was all that mattered. Moonlight glistened through the leaves of the treetops, casting a white tint in the late-night fog. Lenora watched her own blood drip from her lips, her cheeks, and even her feet, but she couldn't give up. She panted desperately, her tongue dry and cracked, her throat closed up and parched, her stomach growling and begging for food. "Why persist?" a voice in Lenora's head said. "Death awaits you no matter what you choose to do." "No," Lenora whimpered, her eyes filled with tears as she ran, clouding what little vision she had in the darkness. She shut her eyes and wiped the tears away as they streamed down her cheeks. "No, no, no!" Wham! The world began to spin as a massive force struck Lenora on the forehead. She opened her eyes briefly, seeing her own blood on the trunk of a tree in front of herself, and it began moving away. The world itself looked as though it was moving, until Lenora felt her back collide with the ground. Lenora's stomach rose and fell quickly with her short breaths. Her feet blistered and in pain, her legs pulsating, her lungs moving so quickly they could burst. She was sure her death would be swift. Whether it was painful or painless, she didn't care anymore. Acceptance had taken its toll. 5, 6, 7 silhouettes surrounded her, all of them towering as large as the trees around her. Their faces were not visible, but she could see their eyes, some of them red, some of them yellow. Lenora took a deep breath with the last of her consciousness until finally, the world faded to black.